Hi everybody, Jonathan Russell from the orphanmovie.com. We're back with our second vlog here. Today we're actually going to start getting into the nuts and bolts of making movies, the different stages you have to go through. We're going back to the very beginning of where we started at, which is really where you're going to have to start for a movie or writing a book or anything like that, which is going back to story, developing a story. Without a story, you obviously don't have a movie. I don't know, you might be able to make a movie without a story, but I imagine it's going to be colossally boring. But probably some of the stuff I'm going to be covering is just very basics that you probably already know. Maybe some of it's just stuff you haven't thought about. But it's going to be the process that I went through with the writing of this script. There's been a saying that I've heard pretty much my entire life that there are no new stories. I really kind of agree with that because just considering the things that people have happened in their lives and the world we live in, there's just a finite number of things that can actually happen that people can do or can say. For instance, there's only so many people that are ever going to live through history that are going to be born in a particular town. There's only so many people that are going to be doing this or doing that or have these different things happen to them. There's something I looked up online along the lines of this. Some guy that wrote a book, he came up with 7 basic plots. One is overcoming the monster, rags to riches, the quest, voyage and return, rebirth, comedy, and tragedy. I also found another thing where the brilliant author Kurt Vonnegut, apparently, when he was at the University of Chicago, did a thesis stating that essentially that classic stories like Cinderella follow a basic shape, and that all stories would therefore follow a basic shape. Apparently they kind of ridiculed him and said, thanks, have a nice day. Well, somebody more recently has taken that idea and fed a bunch of stories, about 1,700 stories that they got from Project Gutenberg, and fed them into a computer to see what it came up with. And it came up with 6 core trajectories, which, 6 basic plot lines. And what it came up with is rags to riches, tragedy, riches to rags, man in a hole, which is the fall and rise of a person, Icarus, which is the rise and fall, Cinderella, which is fall, rise, fall, rise, and Oedipus, which is fall, rise, fall. That's all, good and fine, and I'm not going to argue with any of those because I really don't know. I just know, like I said, that there's only going to be so many basic type of stories that you can tell. So where do you really begin? I don't really think that you necessarily sit down and go, I'm going to do a fall rise story or something like that. For me, at least, whenever the idea for the Orphan came to me, it was more of a, hey, this is kind of a neat story I'd like to tell. If I had to go by one of those, I would suppose it's probably a rise and fall story. I don't know. I hadn't really thought about it that much. But whenever you decide to write a story, it's not so much that I'm going to sit down, I'm going to write a book, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to write a movie. You have to be inspired somehow, or there's something has to kind of hit you. You have to find your muse, as they say. There's different things that can inspire people to do a story. It could be a event that happened to them, something that they happened to someone else they heard about, something they witnessed. Maybe it's a story based on something else that's already been told. Going with the genre of horror, there's the campfire stories, which isn't necessarily something that people really do a whole lot anymore. I don't know. But it's the idea that people would sit around a campfire and tell ghost stories and try to scare each other because they're out in the middle of the woods and it's night and you don't know exactly what's out there beyond the campfire. As an example of one movie that was made from one of those type stories, it's one of the few that I can actually remember. I don't remember the whole story, but I remember the big tag, the big punch at the end of it was the person being on the telephone, and the other end of the phone they're saying to them, the calls are coming from inside the house. If you've seen the movie Scream, that's what the whole movie came from, is basically that campfire story. As far as the Orphan, that's really the focus I'll be going with as far as story development, because obviously that's the story I'm telling here. The inspiration for me was not necessarily a place or not necessarily a person or a story that I've heard. It was a place. Whenever I was dating my wife, we went over to her brother-in-law's and we took a different route than we usually did, and we passed by this place off the freeway, and I saw it and I was just like, oh my God, what is that? That is a fantastic place. What a wonderful place to tell a ghost story, make a movie. It just blew me away. And it always stuck in the back of my head for years. I finally started looking up and seeing what it was because I was really curious and I thought it'd make a great location for a film. And I ended up finding out that it was indeed at one time a widows and orphans home. And that always kind of stuck with me. Well, that would be a great basis for a movie. Well, whenever I was going to make a movie, like most first-time directors, I was like, "Oh, I'll make a horror movie. That's what everybody does. It's easy, it's cheap, and it's not necessarily any of those things." But whenever I was looking for a story, I remembered that place, and I remembered the way it looked and what it made me think would be happening there, what would have happened in the past possibly, what kind of story could have come out of it. And that's what I started working from, was that. My inspiration was also some other stories that I've heard, some other films that I've heard, and I just built on those. Now, it's not necessarily something that I sat down and created the story full formed. It came in stages. It came in bits and pieces to me. Whenever I first had the idea for the story, I was thinking, well, I'll do a found footage film. Figuring, well, that's kind of forgiving. It could hide a lot of mistakes and that kind of thing. And so I started writing the story that way. And as I got a little further along, I realized that wasn't necessarily going to be the right format for me to tell the story I wanted to tell. Whenever I was starting to write it also, I went into it with a little bit of a mistaken idea of, oh, the inspiration will hit me and that's when I'll write. You can't do that. You have to actually sit and write. There's some things that I've read that say don't expect that to happen, because it doesn't, and it doesn't. You have to just sit down. Some people say it has become your job in a way. It makes time for yourself at one point in time in the day or during the week that you're going to sit down and you're going to write. Make yourself do it. If you sit around waiting for the inspiration, it's just not going to come. Sometimes it will, but sometimes it's going to hit you in the middle of the day when you're at your day job and there's nothing you can do about it but sit there and go, I wish the day would hurry up and end so I can go home and write. Well, by the time you get home, you're tired and you don't feel like writing anymore. Well, if you have that information in the back of your head, either file it away for a time that you're going to be able to write or make yourself sit down and write it. With The Orphan, whenever I was writing the story, like I said, I started off with going in one direction and it started going in another direction. I found that as you write, sometimes the ideas you have aren't necessarily going to work. You have to be very flexible and very open. And if it gets really frustrating at times whenever you hit a wall and you're just like, how am I going to get myself out of this? There are some people I've read about that actually write specifically with that in mind. I'm going to paint myself into a corner, and how am I going to get out of it is going to be what really makes the story. That's a little too difficult for most people to do. I know it is for me. With The Orphan, whenever I changed the story, I had to think about where I was at, where I wanted to go to, and how I was going to get there, which is really what you're doing with any story you write. But I had certain things that I knew I wanted to have happen. There were ideas that I had that didn't necessarily lead from point A to point B, but they were things that I wanted to include in the story. How did I get from that to that is what really made me frustrated and sometimes made me inspired. As we went along in the process of writing the story, there were other things that I did. Some of the things that I jumped ahead on that I really shouldn't have, technically speaking. So I did some location scouting. I should have done that way later in the process. But there were some things I wanted to see because I had an idea that I wanted to do this. And I think this is where I can do it, but is it going to allow me to do that? And that ended up turning the story in several directions because there were some places that were exactly what I hoped. And it turned out I was going to be able to go there and film. There's also some places that were, wow, this is fantastic, but I'm not going to be able to get anywhere near it. I'm not going to be able to, do a single frame of footage there. And that ends up having to turn your ideas and your story in directions that sometimes you don't want them to go, but it's things you have to do in order to make it work. The location that I used as the inspiration for the story, I really wanted to be able to film at, but as it turned out, I didn't ever hear back from the owner, which meant I wasn't going to be able to film there. So I had to, okay, plan B. Okay, well, plan C. got almost all that lined out now, but the story is already written. However, now that I've gotten some feedback from other people that I've had read the story, there's certain changes I'm having to make. So as you go along through the story, don't think necessarily I'm going to sit down, I'm going to write from here to there, and this is what it's going to be. It's end of, this is my first draft, my final draft. That's never going to happen. If some people it might, I don't know. I envy you if you're able to actually do that. I'm actually about to start another draft of my script because there's some things that have happened as far as locations that have changed, and I'm having to change the script accordingly. That's really about all I have this time around. I know some of it I've been talking in circles, and hopefully it's made sense. Hopefully it's been useful to you. We'll be coming back next time with another topic. It's probably going to be screenwriting, actually going through the process of doing it. I'll go over a couple of the different screenwriting programs that are available and the one that I actually used, which I thought was very easy, very intuitive. I'll be glad to plug it for them. But look for us next time here on the orphanmovie.com. Look for us out there on social media. The Orphan Movie is our name under Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Our website is theorphanmovie.com. That's where you're at right now. And also you can write to us. We really do want to hear from you. Like I said, all the input we can get from y'all is great, and we really appreciate it. The address is realorphanmovie@gmail.com. It's all one word, realorphanmovie@gmail.com. Look forward to hearing y'all, and we'll see you next time.